All right, and for more on this, we're joined in the studio by Zimbabwean political analyst Acie Lumumba. You were very quick yesterday. We were talking to you from Harare, and here you are in studio with us this morning. Thank you for coming through.
Thank you for having me.
Well, as a start, results out. Emerson Mnangagwa declared winner of first post-Robert Mugabe elections. Your reaction, please?
I think what has happened is the elections were a litmus test for Zimbabwe because we had the world's attention and the world wanted to see, number one, how would we react to life post-Robert Mugabe as far as elections are concerned? But number two, how would we react to the ultimate test of democracy? You know, I've always said the real test of democracy is not how do you handle victory when you win. The real test of democracy is how do you handle defeat? And it was for both sides. How was MDC going to react to a defeat, or how was ZANU-PF going to react to a defeat? And this is what the world came to see. The election observers are in the country, and of the election observers who've given their statements so far, they've cleared at least the process that led us to the elections. They've highlighted the areas where the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission is to improve. But I think what's most charming and impressive is of all the reports that have come out, there is not a single report that has come out against ZANU-PF, the political party, which is the party that won. While there's irregularities or while there is areas to improve as far as the commission is concerned or as far as state media is concerned, which is really the two institutions highlighted in any of the reports, there hasn't been any fault accredited to ZANU-PF. And I think this is highly a huge departure from where we've come from as a country. I think ZANU-PF should applaud itself for the work it's done, but I think so should MDC. You know, you're talking about a political party who, in the last election, had 1.2 million votes under the legendary Morgan Tsvangirai. Nelson Chamisa has been able to almost double the votes that his predecessor had. So, good play from both sides. As of to the date where we are today, as far as the electoral process is concerned, Zimbabwe has been an example, and I've never been more proud of our electoral process, looking at the history of the country as I am today.
Well, you know, you started off by saying that, you know, this was a test of Zimbabwe's democracy. And I wonder from you, and it seems that you're alluding to the fact that you believe that Zimbabwe won the test, but let's look at this. I mean, for example, we had 6 people losing their lives, and I've continued to say this. This is something that I feel is somehow being downplayed somewhat. I mean, I think the focus is on who won and, you know, the elections themselves and, you know, the MDC and all of that. But it does seem that there's little focus on the fact that 6 people died. And that's not a small issue. I mean, you say that, you know, good play on both sides. I don't think so when 6 people have lost their lives post-elections.
Okay, so when you're defining the electoral process, you're defining the journey that you moved from the date the elections were announced to the results being announced. So from election date announced, results being announced. You're not referring to what's happening outside of the electoral process. Let's speak about the matter you've brought up of the lives that have been lost. First of all, it is highly regrettable that lives have been lost. In fact, it makes me sick that the military came on the road and lives were lost. But let's put the whole conversation into perspective. There is a difference between a peaceful protest and a riot. There is nothing unique to Zimbabwe about the military getting on the street to defend state. I'll give you examples. Just a few years ago in Baltimore in the United States, the military guard was put on the streets because the police in the United States were not able to contain the riots that were taking place there. In Turkey 2 years ago, same thing. When the coup was attempted on the president of Turkey, the military was not able to contain the riots that were taking place in the country. The military was deployed in Turkey. In Cyprus just 4 years ago, exactly the same thing. In the United Kingdom in 2011, when there were riots and David Cameron was the prime minister, there was a big conversation and David Prime Minister had to put the whole National Guard on alert. Thankfully, they had 17,000 extra forces to deploy in London. That's why they eventually didn't deploy the military. So military presence on the road is a result of provocation. There is a difference between when I go and I apply and I say, can I have a police clearance because I would like to go and air my democratic rights? And me going into the streets and burning tires and burning buildings and burning people's cars and shutting down people's businesses who have nothing to do with why I'm on the street. So I may be as angry and livid as I want to be, but it should never, my democratic right should never be at the expense of yours. It should never be at the expense of other businesses. So while I in the strongest terms condemn what the military did, I also, in the strongest sense, condemn the opposition leaders for encouraging the day that happened. They wanted to see this happen. If you listen to the language and narrative of Tendai Biti, one of the MDC Alliance principals, this is exactly what they wanted. You know, they wanted people to get on the road. They kept speaking a language of, we will die for our vote. We are willing to defend our vote before the vote was even announced. So they caused this. The military came in. I don't agree with what the military did. But in the end, I guarantee you this, Zimbabwe will be put under order. Every state has a responsibility to protect itself. Zimbabwe will protect the people. It will protect the democratic right of protesters who protest in a legal fashion. But never, in any country, including in South Africa, should you allow tyranny to control the day. Never, including in South Africa, should you allow Johannesburg to hold the country at hostage.
You know, you talk about the fact that the electoral process itself was successful. So I'll move away from the 6 lives lost for the moment. But a successful electoral process, is it not where both parties, the winners and the losers, are going, okay, this was a fair process? I mean, we've heard now in the clip just before our conversation that Chamisa was questioning the results. In fact, the MDC rejecting them full out, saying that the results were unverified. I mean, what is that all about? Surely this means that the election process was perhaps somehow flawed. Okay. If the opposition or the party that's lost in this case is saying, well, look, we're not necessarily happy and we feel that there was vote rigging, we feel that the process wasn't fair to all. So how do you then say that the election process was indeed successful if we're moving and looking and zoning in on that process that you're saying we should be focusing on at this point?
All right. So there is a variance, there is a difference between process and personality. Process refers to anyone who wanted to register to vote. Could you register to vote? Yes, you could. Anybody who wanted to vote on election day, could you vote on election day? Yes, you could. When the votes were being counted on election day, did the necessary players who needed to participate in that process get leeway to participate in that process? Yes, they did. Now, what you're referring to is personalities. Personalities who say, oh, it's not a free and fair election unless I win. It's only free and fair when I win. Here is the trouble with the clip you're referring to that you don't give context to. MDC, the political party, they have never been able to accept any political result, including internal elections. Understand, you're referring to a political party where every time there has been an election, whoever lost the election decided to start their own party. So every time there was internal conflict, Tendai Biti left and said, if I'm not the one running MDC, I'm leaving. Woshuma and Ngube did the same thing. If I'm not the one running MDC, I'm leaving. Atham Tambara did the same thing. If I'm not the one running MDC. So they've never been able to understand that democracy is not about being a victor. Just because we said everybody participate.
That's ironic, given that the ZANU-PF has had one president for so long, though.
Absolutely. So this is, you know, it stands as true for MDC, as it does for ZANU-PF, as it does for any political party. Just because ZANU-PF did it, we're supposed to take a departure from that, not to repeat it. But let me just validate that point by adding this narration. There is nothing wrong with doubting the validity of a result. If you think there has been foul play, it's okay. And there are channels by which you address that. First of all, you address it through legal channels. We have an electoral court which you should approach. But at the very least, if you should approach them, can you have some evidence? Some evidence? But what has happened in MDC is they've gone from magical theories to spiritual theories to literally theories out of Mars. So they've gone from, oh, the ballot papers, if you put an X on Nelson Chamisa, it's going to magically disappear and the X is going to show up on Emerson Mnangagwa. Then they said, no, 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 actually, we've changed our minds. What is happening is the military is telling people to go and vote. No, 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 in fact, we've actually changed what's happening again. What is happening is they're adding extra zeros. In fact, hold on. What is happening is Nelson Chamisa's face should be number 2, and Emerson Mnangagwa's face should not be next to Nelson Chamisa's. So this is voter rigging. But the worst of all, the worst argument I've heard is we have won. How do you know you have won? Oh, because you've seen our rallies. Do you not see all these people who love us? When did rallies start determining a victory? There is something called a V11 form. When you go into the polling station and you vote, and the votes are compiled, all the polling agents who are in the room, that includes MDC, ZANU-PF, all the other political parties, that includes election observers, that includes polling executives. They look at this V11 forms, everybody has to sign it. And everybody has to say, we've signed, we've endorsed that at this polling station, these are the results. Immediately, they're posted outside, okay? Once they're posted outside, you use that as evidence to how many votes you got. So the one question MDC has failed to answer from the moment they started their claims, show us the V11 forms. Can you show us where your argument that you won is coming from? Give us some basis. But it's not a party that likes to give basis. It's a party that likes to throw magical concepts into the world, and they believe magic. We're going to
bring them here. And in fact, we were hoping to have Tendai BT in studio this morning. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. But
he wouldn't come. Not today.
Oh, no, he would.
Today is not a day he would come. Tendai BT would not come because, number one, he doesn't have answers. Number two, he would never go against me.
Oh,
he doesn't have the temperament to control himself against an intellect.
All right, we'll see about that. But all right, you've now criticized the MDC, the ZANU-PF of doing, pardon me, you've criticized the MDC of doing something that ZANU-PF itself has actually done, which is where Robert Mugabe, the former president, said, well, if I'm not going to be in charge of ZANU-PF, I'm going to step back then, and I'm actually then going to vote for the MDC. Do you not find some irony in what you're saying?
Well, I'll tell you where the irony is. The irony is everything Robert Mugabe was detested for, which was absence of democracy, absence of being able to hear other people's ideas, absence of understanding at some point you've got to go, and absence of understanding process is exactly the same symptoms or the same manifestations that are now being displayed by Nelson Chamisa. May I remind you, Nelson Chamisa is not leading the alliance because he was elected. He's not leading because he was democratically put in there. In order to get there, he did exactly what Robert Mugabe did. He said, no, I am the one center of power. I am the alpha and the omega. Nelson Chamisa never at one point told us who his cabinet is. Never at one point told us who his vice presidents are. Because he said, I am the center of power. When I get in, I'll take care of everything. Don't worry. This is exactly what Robert Mugabe did. You couldn't make a move in ZANU-PF without Robert Mugabe. Now you can't make a move with the alliance without Nelson Chamisa. This is why you see Tendai BT now fighting Nelson Chamisa, because Tendai BT has one mission: to destroy Nelson Chamisa. He will set him up every single day, and Nelson Chamisa doesn't see it, and I think these are some of the tactical reasons why he didn't quite make it past the post.
Now, what is your perception of Emerson Mnangagwa's leadership? I mean, it seems that you're quite positive about it, but how much more different really will he be to Robert Mugabe? Let's not forget that he was an ally of Robert Mugabe. I would assume that much of his political mentoring was coming from Robert Mugabe. So when we say, oh, there's this change in Zimbabwe, are we being honest?
Okay, so let's be clear what the job of Emerson Mnangagwa and the expectation on Emerson Mnangagwa is versus the job of the people of Zimbabwe. Emerson Mnangagwa has the job to set the vision of where we're going. Every single Zimbabwean has the job of rolling up their sleeves and working towards getting there. Now, if you use the argument to say, but Emerson Mnangagwa worked with Robert Mugabe, come on now, who didn't? Did Morgan Tsvangirai not work with Robert Mugabe? I mean, were they not president and prime minister?
You're not answering the question, sir.
Hold on, can we then say that so he's compromised? But if your question is, so on what basis do I then say Emerson Mnangagwa is a departure from Robert Mugabe? It's simple. You look at the track record of Robert Mugabe, you look at the track record of Emerson Mnangagwa. For the first time in the country, we've had over 50 electoral observer missions in the country. Robert Mugabe would have never allowed that. For the first time in Zimbabwe, private and public press is covering the opposition. Never done under Robert Mugabe. For the first time in Zimbabwe, we've reapplied to join the Commonwealth. Never happened under Robert Mugabe. But most importantly, for the first time in Zimbabwe, we've had a president of ZANU-PF who has not said one word or one declaration contrary to the Electoral Commission. At no point in Emmerson Mnangagwa's rallies did he ever talk about Chamisa, did he ever talk about ZEC. He simply spoke about why you must vote for him based on his Vision 2030. That's a huge departure.
Let's talk about that Vision 2030. I mean, one of the things that Mnangagwa did say was that he wants to take away the image of Zimbabwe being seen as a pariah state. What did he mean by that? And also just go into it for us then about this Vision 2030 that he spoke about.
Okay, so Vision 2030 is premised on one key pillar. And the pillar is Zimbabwe must become a middle-income country by the year 2030. What that means is, whatever you're making right now, you had a situation where you were working extra harder, but making much less. To raise you up to middle-income country, it means how do we take the GDP of the country per capita, and how do we make you make more money? But once you make more money, how do we make sure more money stays in your pocket? Now, you do that in a couple of ways. The first thing you must do is you have to open the doors for investors to come in. Once you open the door, you have to make it easy for investors to do business. Once it's easier for investors to do business, this is how capital works. When I make more money, that means I can spend more money. When I can spend more money, that means I can help you make more money, which means you can spend more money too. Zimbabwe has to start producing. There's a sector in the Vision 2030 plan which is purely focused on command agriculture, making sure we get our agricultural productions up. I mean, if you look at our agricultural production now versus, say, a country like Kenya, which only has 4% arable land, versus Zimbabwe, which is over 90%, which is over 70%, sorry, we are nowhere near where we should be. Now, the way command agriculture comes in is it helps me up my bumper harvest, up my production. You do the same thing in mining. You bring in more money into mining, allow the productions to go up. That means you got bigger gold reserves. Once you have bigger gold reserves, you got a stronger currency, because currency backs itself off of gold. Then you do the same thing with housing. Then you do the same thing with our exports, which is our tobacco, our golden leaf. Anytime you're producing and sending things out of the country, that means you are bringing money in. And that is how you build an economically sustainable vision. The premise of Vision 2030 is how do we make more Zimbabweans get closer to prosperity than they were before. Rwanda is now pretty much almost at a middle income level. Can Zimbabwe do it? Absolutely it can. Is it Emmerson Mnangagwa's job? Absolutely not. It is all our job to move the train that's going to get us to Vision 2030.
Okay, so I want to ask you this. There seems to be some kind of trend as to where, the world is sort of moving, where we're seeing, I suppose, young presidents, if one can call it that. We've got Macron in France, and, Canada's done the same thing. It just seems that the age is starting to be more sort of reflective of, I won't say the youth, but I think that we can put it that way.
Yeah.
Is there, and I don't know if you would agree with me, I mean, I do know that, you support Emmerson's vision at this point, but do you not have a sense somewhere in your mind that we should be moving towards younger leadership? And, you speak about vision. Doesn't younger leadership bring that sort of new vision, a new way of looking at things? I mean, we still have ZANU-PF and party right, fine, understood. But at the end of the day, and this is what I've been seeing on social media too, is that, well, Zimbabwe's basically gone again and made a Madala. I'm sure you know what Madala means, an old man, a president. Surely, at some point, Africa needs to start looking at, younger presidency and a new vision, a sort of clearer vision, if one can put it that way. Are you not concerned in any way?
So, we will be in a lot of trouble the day we start replacing quality with age. Just because I am younger doesn't mean I know. Just because you're older, neither does it mean you know neither. So age should never be the barometer by which we test competence. We should always look at ability, but we should also always respect the people's will. The president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, said just before we went into the election in his last meeting with young people, when he gets into office, should he be elected, 25% of his cabinet is going to be young people. Is 25% enough? I don't think it is enough. But the very fact that we are now mainstreaming youth participation in governance issues is important. But let me tell you where I think people don't pay enough numbers and enough attention to. ZANU-PF is the party in this election that fielded majority of young candidates. If you look at the MDC candidature list, outside of the fact that you only had 7 women out of 210 seats, you only had 32 young people who were under the age of 35 running in that election. Now you go to ZANU-PF, out of the 210 seats, you have over 80. So it's still ZANU-PF, the same party you critique that its leader might be a bit older than the opposition's leader, who had younger people. In the last election, same thing, 2013. In fact, I was the youngest candidate in the last election, and I was only 24 at the time. So the notion that ZANU-PF is not friendly to young people is very false. What I think the fault is young people themselves. We as young people of the continent have got to start taking affirmative action to get ourselves recognized. Zimbabwe is 70% of the country being young people under the age of 35. The average age of Africa today is 24 and a half years old. So the continent is young. The continent is very young, but the continent needs to understand how to use and leverage off of being young. You can't say just because I'm young, put me in. Just because I'm a woman, put me in. Just because I'm black, put me in. No. Go in because you've demonstrated ability and capacity. I pray for the day young people on the continent begin to put themselves forward to run for political office. I'm so proud of Zimbabwe. I mean, we've fielded more young people in this election than even South Africa did in its last election. I mean, we've had over 60% of the complete candidates. Now, we're not looking at even other parties outside of just the big two.
But it really was a two-horse race, let's be honest.
Oh, absolutely. It was always a two-horse race, and not for reasons that the young people were not there. It was a two-horse race because politics is more than just about your age. It's more than just about your beliefs. It also has a lot to do with systematic structures. ZANU-PF has a highly well-oiled engine that is fully functional and seasoned. You can't beat the machinery of ZANU-PF with your passion. You can't beat the machinery of ZANU-PF with just your ideas. You are going to have to organize yourself and literally morph into an operation that understands what is door-to-door, what is get out the vote. ZANU-PF has structures that go down to the furthest part of the country. MDC picked up its structures. That's why they went up almost by 1 million votes in this election. So you don't beat ZANU-PF because of your age. You don't beat any political party because of your age. You beat a political party because you've got a system that is oiled enough to be able to contest.
I wish I could go on. We really could go on for hours on this, but unfortunately we're out of time at this point. Acie Lumumba, always a great pleasure speaking to you. Thank you very much. I, of course, had to play devil's advocate in this case because I do see where your mind is today, and I see you are happy about the results. So we'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Acie Lumumba, political analyst in Zimbabwe there. Let's take a short break. Do stay with Afro Breakfast.